Hi everyone, I'm Manny, and you're listening to BayonBayou with Manny. This 7-episode podcast on anti-Asian hate, being Cambodian, and COVID-19 gives voice to Khmer 1.5 and second generations who are championing change in a time of racial divide in America. These stories showcase their unique journey of struggles and successes to make a difference in a country in which they call home. Today, I am talking to Mike Keo. Mike is a husband, a father, and pre-COVID, a very busy wedding photographer. But when the coronavirus hit the United States last year, he made a career pivot to fighting social injustice by helping to tell other people's stories. Hi, Mike. Welcome.
Hi, Manny. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. So everything changed for you in March of 2020. You started the hashtag I am not a virus online campaign. What was the story behind your initiative?
In February, we're hearing this rhetoric of the Chinese flu, the Chinese virus, the Wuhan flu. And as a Cambodian American, I have parents that are elderly. They're in their late 50s. And I was worried for them to go shopping, to go to the gas station, because I knew that someone would see them and say that they are carrying the virus and want to attack them. My wife, I was worried about her. I was worried about my kids being bullied. So I decided to take portraits as a photographer. I decided to take portraits of Asian Americans that started off with my brother, sister, my neighbor, who's Filipino American, and to create, to allow us to say what we loved about ourselves as Asian Americans, and also to put the ball in the court of our neighbors to keep us safe, right? It's If anyone in your community is being attacked because of the way they look, their religion, their sexual orientation, and gender, then you should be outraged. And so I started these photos called I Am Not a Virus that showcased our humanity, said what we loved about ourselves, and it took off in March.
What's so great is that you invited the community in to support an awareness that was still at the beginning. I remember that back in March of 2020, like everyone else, I was scared and I was really uncertain of the future. Your platform began as a photo campaign to break the cycle of racism. And what is so cool is that you applied your photography skills to your new cause. Tell me exactly what you did and how people started noticing you.
So I posted it online, and folks started reaching out locally to come to the studio, and all of a sudden I have like 22 portraits of Asian Americans within our state, and I think there was a list of about 30 more people that wanted to come in. Mm-hmm. And Governor Lamont put in a shutdown order in place. And I followed that direction, because how awful would it be if I was doing a photo called I'm Not a Virus and there was a COVID breakout in my studio,
right.
So, and, it connected with people because we were photographing I was photographing Southeast Asian Americans, people that don't feel a part of the Asian American identity because, we are darker skinned. We are from a different type of immigration background. And I was also photographing adoptees and Asian Americans that identify as LGBTQIA+. And what I wanted to do was to kind of strengthen the idea of what it meant to be Asian American. Mm-hmm. And I think that really connected with people, that intersectionality, that idea that they can relate and connect with someone else based on lived-in experiences.
Right. You serve a number of target markets in your fight for social justice for Asians in America and other community as well. Tell me who else you serve and why are you so inclusive?
I think coming from like an art background, I am in these spaces where I work with people from all different walks of life, different economical statuses, different races. And it pains me to see people being targeted. In June with community partners, Conserve Bears of Color West Hartford and the Khmer Cultural Center, we ended up doing a project called I Am Not a Threat. And it was to highlight the Black American experience. And again, it was kind of like I Am Not a Virus, where we photographed 25 folks. And my friend Adrian came up with a question, when did you first realize you were Black in America? And we also took photos of like 2 pictures. For Asian Americans, I only took one photo of them smiling without a mask, because oftentimes we're seen as the same person. So that was, intentional. For this project, Adrian talked about how sometimes she's forced to smile so people won't feel scared of her, and how many Black Americans have that experience, and it's universal. So we did one photo of smiling and not smiling to signify who should make who feel safe in this climate of such racial animosity that's been in our country for so long, right? And she asked the question, when did you first realize you were Black in America? I asked my participants for the Asian American photos, have you experienced COVID racism? And many had, but many were uncomfortable sharing it on camera. And they weren't even scared to call it racist. They were apprehensive of calling it racist, like being excluded from a store while other people are allowed in.
What would they call it?
They would call it uncomfortable. What's the other word? Ignorant, but they wouldn't call it racist. And to sit in the space and hear Black Americans talk about their first experience of being Black in America allowed me to understand my experiences as an Asian American better. And I think that's why ethnic studies is so important, right? And uplifting all communities that are marginalized, because you understand yourself better. And when I'm talking about understanding myself better, during this project, you had the story of a woman in the 70s. She was growing up as a young girl, and she was playing with the neighborhood girl every single day after school. And then one day, the girl's mom comes home and tells her daughter to come inside right now. A few minutes later, the girl comes outside and goes, I can't play with you anymore. And she goes, why can't you play with me? And she goes, I can't play with you because you're Black. Her mother and her father kind of explained to her what it was going to be like of growing up Black in America.
Right. Children are really innocent people. They see the world differently from us adults who have been colored by our own past experiences. Coming up, Mike says he has been accused of plagiarism due to being an Asian American.
So how could a kid that looks like me, that comes from a household where his parents are always working, whose grandmother doesn't speak English, can write like his peers? Yeah, but also on top of that, you have people that bring these children into what racism looks like, what it feels like. As Asian Americans, as a Cambodian American, I was accused of plagiarizing growing up many times, right? Because boys like me shouldn't write like that. Because when you called my house, my grandmother would pick up, and my grandmother spoke Khmer and 4 other languages, but not English well, so she'd pick up in broken English. So how could a kid that looks like me, that comes from a household where his parents are always working, whose grandmother doesn't speak English, can write like his peers? But for my parents, it was a sense of being proud. My goodness, my son is so smart that like the teachers called and asked if he's plagiarizing because they don't think he can write like that.
Yeah, that's a great example of racial assumption, right? What's your take on that incident? Was that racism or something else?
Yeah, our community, we don't have that language, that generational guide to tell us this is racist. Instead, we're told to walk away. My dad would always say walk away, and my mom would always say fight, fight, fight. So, and but we need to develop that language when we start talking to the next generation and ourselves. So when we are denied business, we are excluded, we can say unequivocally and with confidence, that was a racist thing that just happened to me.
I guess what I'm hearing you say is that knowledge is power, and the more we know, the more empowered we feel. Speaking of feelings, what's your earliest memory of becoming aware that you look different from others?
I think it might have been fifth grade.
Hmm.
You know, I had a teacher who one day told me to use rice as glue because I was, you know, Asian. She was like, you have rice at home. You should use rice if you don't have glue. Because I told her I only had tape, and I never told my parents because you know, I just knew that like I was singled out for that. This is the same teacher that gave me a zero on a book report on the Amistad because she didn't know that the Amistad story existed. Then it was
Huh.
not real. So like I think that was the first time I realized I was a little different than my peers. And I think also in ESOL, right? We were all put all the Khmer kids in my school. There was like five of us. We were put in like ESOL, like English speaking for other languages.
Hmm.
And so we're like we always thought like why do we have to be in this room when everyone else is playing? I was like, why do I have to get pulled out? Like my English was at this level, you know, my English was what I spoke all the time. You know, I spoke Khmer with my grandmother and my aunt. And those are the only two that I speak Khmer with, or I used to speak Khmer with. Um, but like English was my first language, and so were all these other children. But we weren't allowed to read with the kids in class. We were sent to ESOL because of the way we looked. You know, that's what it felt like.
How long were you there for?
I think like 4 years, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Since we're on the topic of race, what was your most unforgettable experience with racism growing up in America?
I think when I was 15 going to 16, I was in a class called American Studies. It brought in US history and literature. I loved the class because of the literature involved. I wanted to be in honors, but they told me that I couldn't keep up. But I read at the same pace. You know, I was done with the books quickly. I got the themes, and that's something I've always been able to do well was get the themes of certain things. And yeah, and but we were in class, and I had a friend. She was black, or she is black, and we were talking about this book called Ragtime. And in the book, kids were calling me Cat Like Chinaman. Like the white kids were calling me Cat Like Chinaman because that's what was in the book. You know, it was the first book that we read that had Asian representation in it, and it was a stereotype. And my friend who's black, she said something along the lines of like, I don't want to go to Chinatown. It smells funny. The teacher just starts laughing, and she goes, well, you don't have to eat the rats or the pigeons.
Wow.
You know, and the entire class erupted in laughter because you don't expect your teacher to make a joke like this, a racist joke. And the entire class laughed for about like 40 seconds, and they stared at me. So they realized that there was an Asian kid in the class. And I can't begin to tell you how alone I felt at that specific moment, but I didn't have the language to explain why that hurt me. It's not until I got a little bit older that I was able to understand in my 20s that it hurt me because, one, she singled me out and she was a person in power. And two, she stripped me of all my experiences of why I love Chinatown. You know, Chinatown for me is when you get like Jay Boy or Bro, I can't pronounce it, but like, you know, the white fish that you make call with. I'd go there and get some for my grandmother. It was where we would have like Mangkut and Logan and Lychee, Pai Chow, right? You bring it home and eat it with the family. And it was the dim sum dinners that we got. It was, you know, it was magical because my grandma would talk about the old country, you know? And within 2 minutes, all of this is stripped away from me. And I don't have the language to describe what I'm feeling or why I'm angry. And I've always wondered if, like, the person that committed this, right? The person that enacted this, do they ever think about it, you know? And I think people have the ability to change, but I wonder, like, with all this anti-Asian violence coming in, do these people that have caused these harms that were in positions of power as educators or guidance counselors, do they think about their biases?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say that's really dependent on your own self awareness, right? And your own understanding of your biases. Let's go back and talk a little bit about the I Am Not a Virus online campaign. You have worked with high schools and universities all over America, and in it, you incorporated a mental health workbook to help others cope with racism and to feel empowered. What else did you hope to achieve with the workbook?
So this workbook came in collaboration with Kelly Hire, campaign manager, and Jason Chang, the director at the Asian American Studies Institute at UConn. And what I wanted to achieve, or what we wanted to collectively achieve, was create a language for Asian Americans to identify how they're feeling. Because, many of us don't know how we're feeling during weddings, for example. Your parents want you to do the traditional stuff, right? They're like, you gotta do this, you gotta do that, and you go, why? They go, you got to, So so there's a disconnect between our experiences and the way we're feeling, and racism against Asians have happened many times before, right? In the 1980s, you had 2 Cambodian Americans killed, a young 13-year-old Vandy Fong and a young Cambodian father in Philadelphia. But these things we all have our experiences with racism that passes down through oral history, but we don't see it reflected in the greater narrative and our lived-in experiences because we don't see it on the news, we don't see it in history books. So the point of this mental health book was to allow us to access our mental health by making these things more real and less fragmented and less theory, but more your lived-in experiences. Did you ever bring food to you did? What'd you bring?
I have a confession. I did not bring any lunch when I was in high school. I did when I was younger, but I stopped just because I was a teenager and, I was going through my awkward moments and I was seeing other kids being bullied and being made fun of because of their ethnic foods. I mean, I love Cambodian food, don't get me wrong, but sometimes it has a strong smell and I was scared and maybe even a little bit of a shame. I love our stinky bahog, but the smell is a bit much. So tell me, Mike, what was your lunchbox incident?
It wasn't really a lunchbox incident, but the morning of leftovers the night before for dinner that night, my mom made steak and baklahong. And her baklahong is super garlicky, spicy, sour, and the way I like it with not bry. So I was in 4th grade, and that morning I woke up a little bit earlier to get my and have it with baklahong. And I got to school and I realized my breath was stinking. And I was in 4th grade, I was probably 9 or 10. And I remember going to the bathroom in art classes, constantly washing my mouth. And about the 5th time I washed my mouth, I walked in and there was 4 kids and they were talking about how bad my breath was. And they're like, did he eat dog food?
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny now when I think about the harm, but I remember that day I felt so embarrassed and I felt so scared, but that allowed me to know that I cannot eat what I had for dinner before going to school. And then so my parents didn't really pack me what's called Khmer food, but my mom would make pasta and all my friends loved her pasta, but her pasta was made by a refugee who wanted to make her kids fit in or feel fit in. So her pasta is fantastic, but there's Khmer seasonings. That's it's the stuff that we probably put in cocoa, star anise and cinnamon. And but it wasn't
probably a little fish sauce in there as well.
Hell yeah. The giant makes it. And all my friends loved it. We didn't have containers. So I remember being made fun of for not having access to a Tupperware, or a backpack, a lunchbox. Our lunchboxes were plastic bags. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
For me, when I discovered poetry and photography and the arts, it allowed me to express myself and kind of have these meditations on my past experiences and work through them. Many Asian Americans don't have that because the arts may not have been something that they were encouraged to do. They probably weren't encouraged to communicate. So they have a hard time kind of breaking down these barriers. So with this mental health workbook, there's poetry, there's art, and there's prompts. So you can begin to access this without the right language at first, but to build up get the building blocks to a certain level where you can be comfortable sharing your story.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you're bringing up. I can totally relate to this. Growing up in an Asian family, I don't think I saw a lot of people sharing their feelings. And so, that was not my model. And I did not know how to articulate my feelings for a long time. And it was hard for me. We were not taught to put feelings into words. And that's a disadvantage to standing up for oneself and to helping ourselves if we don't have the tools to know how to do that. Coming up, Mike says anti-Blackness is the root of racial discrimination.
There's a story about me being 4 years old trying to put lotion on to lighten up my skin so I could get compliments too.
Tell me a little bit about yourself, Mike. You live in Connecticut now. What was it like growing up there?
So, we moved back to Connecticut or to West Hartford to be closer to family. Growing up, I think that I faced a lot of discrimination from folks in power with teachers. I was a quiet person. I mumbled a lot. I think it was that lack of self-confidence without knowing who you are, right? I love Khmer food. I love pork. I love I like the sticky stuff. And I've always loved the food, but I didn't understand who I was or why the decisions I made were there. Plus, you're living under the shadow of genocide. So your parents are raising you the way they survived, to be tough, to be strong. And I think my story is common with a lot of other Cambodians that I've met that are my age.
But I think nowadays we have to, as a father, as someone that's made a ton of mistakes, I do think there is opportunities now to have these conversations that you could be better than who you were yesterday.
Speaking of being a father, you are a father now. You have 2 children and they're quite young. If you have a magic wand, what would you change in America to make it a better place for your children?
I think a lot of it is anti-Blackness, right? And how that permeates into Asian hate. It permeates across our cultures, right? I remember growing up, there's a joke in my family about how I wanted to use whitening cream because my brother was lighter skinned, and people would talk about how pretty he was. And he's a good-looking kid. He's a good-looking kid, but there's a story about me being 4 years old trying to put lotion on to lighten up my skin so I could get compliments too. I don't remember it, but I do remember my grandma telling me I was sore.
Yeah, they normally say that when you're a little darker skin. So srah is charming. And I also was called Khmer srah. So that was, I think, an equivalent. If we were to translate it literally, it would mean Black beauty. So growing up, I totally can relate. I would be called, oh yeah, she's pretty, but she's a little bit dark skinned. Was that what you were called as well, Khmer srah, growing up?
Yeah, so my grandma called me that, and she'll be like, "Chào anh, Khmer at," it's at, and then I come out, and it made me feel better about my color, But I remember meeting my first Asian American friends, right? Like these other cats that were, but being the butt of the joke because I am darker than everyone else. And I think that part of it, because it affects so much of the way we see ourselves, that we see the people around us.
You're right. I think in our own culture, we have racial discriminations against color as well, Darker skinned Cambodians are not as preferred or not as looked up upon as whiter skinned Cambodians. And hence the lightening cream and bleaching products that we use on ourselves. Let's also talk about another thing that you're doing for the community. In addition to raising social injustice awareness, you are also involved in the HB 6619 bill. What is the name of this bill and what's the purpose of this bill?
It is HB 6619, and it's the inclusion of Asian American Pacific Islander studies into a model curriculum for grades K to 8, which means that the state will produce a curriculum to include the stories of us in there, right? And at the same time, and when we have to work on getting people to want this, right? Like the bill can only pass so much. And for me, anti-Asian hate has a long history in our country. Long history. I think this is the first part of like helping or like changing that narrative, seeing us as Americans, as individuals, and understanding what racism looks like against us, right? How would you know that we're seen as foreigners because there was the exclusion? If you don't know about the Exclusion Act, if you don't know about Vision Chin, how do you know that Asians weren't attacked before, or Vandy Fong, or BayonBayou, or Lily Wang? You know, the names go on and on and on. There's no reason why our community should be attacked for the war in Vietnam, but that was the case for over 30 years. South Asians were attacked for like the last 40 years, for like from like call centers to terrorism and outsourcing, you know? And so we see this as a long-term solution of preventing the violence that we're seeing now, and also letting us connect with other communities of color and white communities to see how we all intersect and that our stories are dependent upon one another.
For those people who want to have this bill in place, what steps can they take to make it happen?
I think for the community, it's about getting interest. It's about getting teacher buy-in. It's about creating these partnerships with your schools. You had that experience with me when I was 16. My son last year, his teacher read BayonBayou and this book called BayonBayou, and there's a rice cooker in it. And he's like 4, and he sees the rice cooker. He goes, "Oh, I have one." And he goes, "It makes this song." And he sings the Koreans. We have a Korean rice cooker, so it sings a song after it's done. Homeboy was so proud of this. He was so happy. He was like, "I helped my daddy cook," because they were using a wok. He felt so proud. And then this week, it's Asian American Heritage Month, and I'm actually reading to his class in an hour. But in class, they spent the week talking about Asian Americans, and I just wish my son didn't have to wait till May, and that it's throughout the year. And that's one thing that we're trying to work on. But like, you know, when the teacher's like, "This is Asian American Heritage Month," my son's like, you know, he sees himself. He understands that he is Asian. I can't tell you the excitement that a 5-year-old gets. And then for the white kids and the other kids of color in the class, you start talking about like, what do you cook? Do you speak another language? Do you help your parents? And they go, "Yes, I helped my mom make pasta yesterday." I was like, "Yes, I speak." One of them was like, "I speak Spanish. I speak Nepali," and it creates this sense of warmth and community within a class setting at such a young age. And like to see these kids so proud that they help their parents in the garden, or that they go certain places, starting these conversations through an Asian American lens allows us to see that we aren't different, allows us to see that we have so much in common. And so it's getting teachers on board, and it's getting parents that are non-Asian American and non-parents of color to come on board and say, like, we need this too. Like, this is good for our kids.
This is really exciting. What has been some of the reactions from the Asian communities about this specific bill?
There's been a lot of support. Again, like, I think that, you know, it's great that we got the No Hate Act passed. Senator Hirano, Senator Blumenthal, my representative, I am so proud that they're doing that, and Attorney General Tong. But we need a long-term solution, right? And so the inclusion of ethnic studies, I'm so proud to share that, like, the people that we have on board are not just Asian Americans, Black mothers and fathers, Latinx mothers and fathers, white mothers and fathers. And having that sense of community, saying like, this is great for our kids. Our community partners are all across the board, from like corporations to CT Humanities, who's kindly given us a grant to extend celebrating Asian Americans to the next 3 months. But there's this level of excitement by these parents that our kids are going to grow up different.
Coming up, Mike says we need to work with different communities to fight racism.
So this is why we need to be in community with each other, because we have these shared experiences that are different, but they are too similar.
It has been quite a whirlwind for you, and you have been very successful in making a mark. What were some of the factors that helped your success?
I think it's telling my own personal stories. For Khmer folks, we have a story, and oftentimes we think our story is not important because it's so common. So many of us our parents have escaped genocide or witnessed these deaths. You know, my grandmother lost 2 sons and she never talked about my uncles. And we think this is common because we live in this place but I think us sharing our stories and knowing that we matter allows it to resonate with from folks outside our community or that don't look like us. And I think that's what most people want to do. They want to connect. They don't know how to connect. And when they hear our personal stories, and our personal stories can't just be about trauma, it needs to be about joy, celebration. It needs to be about our humanity. And once we're able to access that, we can make these meaningful connections, influence other people to work with us, to be a part of this change.
What can we do as a community to be more visible and to be louder in championing change in the AAPI community?
I think that we have to advocate for our community, 100%, that we need to advocate for ourselves. In every single possible term, we need to advocate for ourselves. I advocate for myself as a Cambodian American and Southeast Asian American. That's how besides father, husband, I identify first as Khmer American and Southeast Asian because our experiences are so different than the other groups and we've been marginalized, right? But then I do open that to Asian American next, But I think our community needs to advocate it for ourselves. We need to be unafraid to say that, Asian American Pacific Islander studies is needed. And at the same time, I do think we have a responsibility to be in community with our neighbors. We need to talk about bringing in African American studies, Latinx history. Like my grandmother would take these walks, right? She would take these rock walks and she would go see her friends. And it was cute. It was cute because she would go see her friends and they'll have coffee and they'll they call each other Yaini. It was great for them. And as I got older and I became friends with members of the Peruvian and Colombian communities and Puerto Rican community in Hartford, right? Their grandparents did the same thing. And it made me realize that it's the sense of agency that they lose from not being able to speak their native tongue while doing common things. But they still find this way to be in community with one another, to feel that sense of freedom and agency. And so we have so much in common. And at the same time, when you have these feel-good stories, you also have to understand that this last year, so many Asian Americans were scared to speak their native tongue. The language they used to express love, connect with one another, to feed their children, they were afraid to use it because they thought someone would beat them up, call them the virus. In the last 4 years, our Latinx population were scared to speak Spanish also, in case they would have a confrontation with someone screaming at them and their children to go home. How do we protect our children when such ugly hatred rears its face? And so this is why we need to be in community with each other, because we have these shared experiences that are different, but they are too similar. And so that's why I feel it is our responsibility at the I'm Not Virus campaign. And I'm fortunate for my team, because we all feel this way, to uplift all voices and not just our voices when we get through the door. We need to hold that door open.
Yeah, it sounds to me like the new slogan here is "We're stronger together." Okay, last question. If you were to win $1 million grant this year, what would you do with the money?
Oh man, I've thought about this. We're working on this thing called History is Colorful. And it is a curriculum to bring in the voices of BIPOC farmers, local BIPOC farmers in your community into your classroom setting, and to bring in artists into your classroom setting. Because our kids need to see themselves reflected in different ways, not just in doctors and engineers, but as artists, as farmers, as creatives. But this program allows young kids to start talking at a young age about their emotions. They grow a plant. My son, they ask him every day, like, what's the weather? It's sunny, you know. Now you could be like, what's the weather? How's your plant growing? What are you growing? And you do these farmers, you can have their lived in experiences of someone that's 15 minutes away from you that's growing these foods. So you can talk about it, you can grow it, and you can talk about migration. And after the crops grow, your parents can help you cook it. And the parents can share like bitter melon, right? I love bitter melon. But like imagine parents that are non-Asian American sharing bitter melon recipes because their kids are growing it. But there's a story of Vichet M, who is a Khmer American farmer. She's one of our people that we interviewed. And she grows bitter melon. And she grows it in Simsbury, Connecticut. She brings it to the market in Coventry. And Coventry is a white market. So what it's called, it's a suburban whiter market. So people are like, what is this? And they try it. She brings it to Hartford. In Hartford, there's this young girl from Trinidad, 5-6 years old, that comes in every Sunday to buy cordelia, because that's what her mom calls it, and her mom cooks it. So, you know, this is a girl that's different cultures, different continents, that uses the same ingredients, and they connect over it. And I think it's a magical feeling of finding community and these culturally relevant foods that are available locally, and, you know, and not brought in from far away to give this little girl. You know, and I think that's kind of, that connection right there is just amazing, and we can make those connections. And I would probably fund it to this type of programming. We are talking with 3 places to pilot this in the fall. I'm excited because I think it can really change the way we see our community, allow us the language to talk about why crops like the corn aren't grown in our backyards or like, you know, locally, and why we have to go to like Lowell to go get them. So it's that's where I would put the money towards. There's interest in it. There's it's hands-on. It opens up the conversation, and with our artists, we've partnered up with museums that are waiting to have these images created. So imagine a kid listening to an artist of color like Cecile Chong, Chinese Ecuadorian, and they hear her experiences, they hear her story, and they do a project that's based on the work that she does with blue and white to empathize their culture. And now you have these pictures either at an art walk or a museum, and you have parents that are white, right? Or parents from any creed come in and learn about the Asian American experience and then see their kids' artwork. It will allow them to continue the conversation, or at least be aware that there's a conversation happening here.
This sounds like a really cool project, and congratulations on getting this far with it. And if people want to join your cause, how do they go about doing it?
They can go online at I'm Not a Virus. They can reach out. You know, one thing that sustains us are donations, as well as many of our supporters have created the space where they brought their companies on board to hear our story, to have these ERGs or fireside chats, and to make donations towards the inclusion of Asian American studies, or the work that we're doing at I'm Not a Virus and creating this content for our communities.
I have learned so much from you today, and here's my conclusion. The takeaway I got from our conversation today is that social justice has no silos. The struggles of Asians, BLM, Latinx, and LGBTQ communities in America might be different, but the pain we feel is the same. You're doing such great work, and it's wonderful to tell your story. Thank you so much, Mike. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoy listening to my guest journey from surviving to thriving as Khmer in America, and for the lessons they have learned and shared with us. For more stories like this, visit us at voacambodia.com. Until next time, I'm Manny, your host of BayonBayou with Manny.